I remember phone calls that the office would receive of a community member calling and saying, oh my gosh, I drove past the grocery store this morning and there's a sign up that it's closed. It was open yesterday. What happened? And at that point, the reality is there's just not much you can do. I mean, there is something you can do, but if you can catch it before the store closes, things are going to move forward so much more quickly.
Something to Chew On is a podcast devoted to the exploration and discussion of food systems. It's produced by the Sunderland Foundation Innovation Lab at Kansas State University. Welcome back to our hosts, Dr. Marina Lovnik, known for her leadership at the American Institute of Baking International, and more recently as coordinator of global food systems at Kansas State University, and Dr. Jeanette Thurston, the executive director for the North Central Regional Association of State Agriculture Experiment Station Directors. When a rural grocery store becomes untenable, the repercussions can be far-reaching. Access to fresh and healthy foods is crucial for community vitality and overall well-being. By cultivating robust partnerships, embracing diverse ownership models, and formulating a comprehensive transition plan, rural grocers can proactively address sustainability and operational challenges before they escalate beyond control. In this episode of Something to Chew On, we feature Rial Carver, program leader for the Rural Grocery Initiative, an extension specialist at K-State Research and Extension. Drawing on her expertise and deep understanding of the challenges faced by rural grocery stores in Kansas and beyond, Ms. Carver identifies, develops, and shares vital resources that sustain grocers and support rural communities across the United States.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I would like to welcome you back to Something to Chew On, and I'd like to welcome today our guest, Rial Carver. Rial is a Rural Grocery Initiative program leader, and she's also working as an extension specialist in the K-State Research and Extension Office. Welcome, Rial. And what we'd like to do is start off today with you giving us a little background on yourself, how you got interested in the work that you're doing now, and how you ended up here at K-State.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. So I guess to start, I would say I grew up in Virginia and went to college at Virginia Tech, which is in the mountains of Southwest Virginia. And I arrived at school with no plan for what I was going to do, but quickly found a program that really changed my path. It was called the Earth Sustainability Program, and it was this 4-semester course that I took. It was not housed within any college. It was an interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary course taught by faculty from across the university, and each semester had a different focus. So energy, water, food, and shelter. And so this, as a freshman, this is what I dove into. And it was really my family those first 2 years because it was a pretty intense course. You had sort of 2 sessions a week and then 2 to 3 kind of smaller group sessions. And so we read all sorts of books and talked about sustainability from all these different lenses. So the first 2 course semesters were energy and water, which, as you may guess, as you may know, can feel very daunting and a little bit gloom and doom. And then the 3rd semester, we started talking about food. And it was finally something where I thought, oh, I can do something here. Yes, I can turn the light off when I leave the room, and I will, but it felt like supporting local farms, understanding where your waste goes or how it's handled was like tangible things that you could do. And so that really shifted my direction. And then soon after that course wrapped up, I participated in the Civic Agriculture and Food Systems minor at Virginia Tech, which took the one semester of food and took it even further. And we started reading Wendell Berry and all sorts of different like iconic sort of food systems authors. And so that led me to feel pretty confident that working within the food system was where I wanted to be. And that's one of those summers in college I decided I needed to work on a farm. And so I found a farm in south central Pennsylvania. It was a 20-acre small-scale farm growing vegetables and fruits. And I worked there this summer, and I learned so much. I learned just all sorts about growing and producing, marketing. I learned about life as a farmer and how hard it was. And I left that summer really feeling strongly that that wasn't necessarily the path for me. I didn't necessarily want to be a farmer, although I have such great respect, deep respect for small-scale farmers. I wanted instead to be doing something that could be supporting farms. How can I support farms, small-scale farms, participate in the food system? And so this is a long path. We will get back to the rural grocery store soon. But basically, so that led me after college. I worked for Virginia Tech as the sustainability coordinator, where I was really working within the food system for this dining services program. I was in charge of all of our waste reduction initiatives. We were composting all of the pre- and post-consumer waste in our dining centers. We were donating food. We were recycling. We also were sourcing locally, and then we also had a farm that provided produce directly to the dining center. And that was really my experience working on a farm helped me to bridge those gaps between a dining center program and kind of a institutional sort of purchasing program with a production model. And I think back to that and I realized that having worked on a farm, I could communicate more effectively with the farmers that were running our dining services farm because I could understand, the tomatoes are ready to be harvested right now. I don't think I'm going to get an answer from them. Maybe I should just go down to the farm and ask. Or a similar problem would be everything's ready to harvest now. How can I get more people down there to help with harvest? So that I do feel like working on a farm has really helped me engage in other aspects of the food system in my career. And so I worked for dining services for almost 5 years as the sustainability coordinator and really enjoyed it, but realized that it was time for my husband and I both to go back to school and get another degree, get a graduate degree. So my husband is in agronomy, and so the two of us were both looking at grad schools around the same time, and we kind of decided whoever finds a place first will go there. So honestly, that's how we got here. My husband completed his master's and PhD at K-State in agronomy. And when we moved out here, though, I really had no idea what I was going to do and just sort of started reaching out, networking, trying to make connections with who was on campus, doing anything related to, at that time, sustainability, since that was really my background. I connected a little bit with the folks working on the Food and Farm Council. I think that may have been where we first connected.
Probably so, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was really great because it helped me connect to what was going on in Manhattan and Riley County and start to make my own connections. And when we were first here, I worked at the People's Grocery Co-op, and I worked at Parks and Rec as an intern, which were both fantastic ways to just kind of connect with the food system for at least through the co-op, and then connect with some of the planning work going on. I guess I failed to mention that my bachelor's degree is in environmental policy and planning. I talked about these other programs that really provided me some focus, but my bachelor's was in policy and planning. And so when we moved out here, I thought, I'd like to go to grad school. I either could go a planning approach or I could go a more agricultural approach. I was interested in there were a couple programs I was interested in here at K-State, and in the end chose to go through the regional and community planning department for my master's. So that's what I ended up doing. But what really got me there actually was seeing somebody. I met with somebody at Radina's one day, and they said, "Have you heard of the Rural Grocery Initiative?" And I said, "Nope, I haven't. I have not heard about that. I'm going to look it up right away." And they just happened to be hiring for a graduate research assistant. So I applied to that position, and mind you, I was not accepted to the graduate school at that point. I had just been sort of connecting with some of the faculty in the regional and community planning program to see if it would be a good fit. But it all kind of came together very quickly. I applied to the grad school. I applied to the graduate research assistantship position, and that's how I got my start with the Rural Grocery Initiative. So that was January of 2017 when I officially started with RGI.
Wow, that's exciting. I hadn't thought about it from the perspective that you're really bringing the perspective of a student as well as a professional to the table here today, which I'm not sure we've done that before in this podcast series. We've had a lot of, obviously, most of the people coming through here have been students at one point in time, some at K-State, but most not. But this brings a little bit of a different twist to the discussion, so that's great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And the connection to Radina's. And that very important.
Very important.
So what do you do in your current job? So what's a day-to-day for someone who is a program leader for the Rural Grocery Initiative?
Ooh, that's a good question. Usually it's a pretty busy day, I would say, jumping from project to project. The Rural Grocery Initiative our goal is to support and sustain locally owned independent grocery stores. And so depending on kind of what programs we are launching or implementing, that really dictates what I'm doing in a given day. Our office is often connecting with individual grocers or community members that have questions on rural grocery, but we're also often meeting with each other to kind of plan our programming, whether that's our Rural Grocery Summit, our National Rural Grocery Summit that's coming up in 2024, or our new Rural Grocery Transition Specialist program that we just launched, or even it could be that we're meeting with some other extension colleagues. So the Rural Grocery Initiative is located and housed within K-State Research and Extension. And so because of that connection, we also participate in the local foods transdisciplinary team, which includes extension professionals across the state interested in local food systems. And so everyone on the RGI team participates in that transdisciplinary team as well. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question very well. Every day is different, but I'd say consistently we are responding to questions from grocers or communities that are supporting rural grocery. We're working on programming to support rural grocers, or we're partnering with either individuals at K-State or some external partners that are in the rural grocery, rural food access realm.
Very good. It sounds like a fun job,
especially
working with rural grocers. So I'm curious, you said you support them, so what are some of their needs?
The biggest need right now is transition planning. So when I first started with RGI, I remember phone calls that the office would receive of a community member calling and saying, oh my gosh, I drove past the grocery store this morning and there's a sign up that it's closed. It was open yesterday. What happened? And at that point, the reality is there's just not much you can do. I mean, there is something you can do, but if you can catch it before the store closes, things are going to move forward so much more quickly than if the store completely closes and then you have to start thinking about reopening. When a store closes, community members start to change their habits because they still need food. So they're going to go out of town to get groceries. And then when community member or group of community members bring a store back to that community or reopen, all of a sudden you're having to change those patterns, those habits again. And so what we've seen is if you can start the conversation earlier, you can make a plan and minimize those chances for the store to just close completely. So we conducted a survey in 2021 of rural Kansas grocers, and we found that 40% of the grocers we surveyed were within 5 to 10 years of retiring, but 80% of those grocers had no plan in place for transition. So it's really, really common that a grocer does not have a plan. And I think there are a variety of reasons for that. The grocery business is not an especially easy one. It is a low profit margin business. It is, you're on your feet day in and day out. It's just not a glamorous job. And it used to be that it was a family business passed down from generation to generation, and we're really seeing that that's not the case anymore, not unlike farming, that kids are moving away from the family business onto bigger cities or onto different types of jobs, different sectors, and that leaves the grocery store and the community kind of left in limbo. You know, who's going to take over this store? And this is really such a critical piece of a rural town or a small town's infrastructure. If you don't have the grocery store, you lose out on jobs, you lose out on access to food, you lose out on some of the cultural benefits of seeing people at the grocery store or seeing students' art displayed on the walls of the store. And then in addition to that, if there is no grocery store in a community, it can be that much harder to attract new families to that community. So the longevity of that community really is in question when a store closes. It's a real challenge,
So when I was working on campus, one of my focuses was looking at Western Kansas and some of the challenges of keeping people there. And obviously this is one of the, as you just mentioned, one of the big problems if a grocery store closes. Right. The chances of that little town surviving are going to go down. Grocery stores and schools, I think, are the two things that are just going to pull them down. What impact have you seen? You've been at this for a few years now. What impact have you seen overall, like in percentage of these areas closing down? Is this something that's still in kind of a negative spiral, or are we seeing any incremental increases at all?
Yeah, so we looked at the data from 2008 to 2018, so over a 10-year period, and we saw that 1 in 5 grocery stores in rural Kansas closed.
Sounds like a lot.
Yes, it's a lot.
It is a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Nationally, there was a study, ERS, the Economic Research Service, did a study that was published in 2021, I believe, that showed that the number of independent grocery retailers in non-metro areas, rural areas, dropped by about 15% between 1990 and 2015. So basically, between 15 and 20% of grocery stores have closed over the last couple of decades. We have seen, well, I'll say two things. It's become very difficult to track those store closures, in part because there's not really a consistent database for keeping track of store ownership or transition or Right. Like if an owner does transition from one to the next, it's hard to see that in a public record, basically. And so it's been hard for us to see whether that trend has started to turn around. But I can say anecdotally that because of our shift in supporting rural grocery transition, we have been helping so many grocery stores start to think about that challenge and make some progress. So I'd like to believe that we are moving the needle. It's just challenging to keep track of that data. And the reason I'll say that, and let me explain that just a little bit more, the data around rural grocery store is challenging because there's not really a clear definition of what is a rural grocery store. Is let's see, if there's a Dollar General, does that count as a rural grocery store?
Some communities might think so.
Some might.
That's
It's
all there is in
unfortunate.
many communities.
We don't necessarily consider that. We look at a full-service grocery store, so having a full offering of, all your standard grocery aisles, meat, deli, fruit, produce, the gamut. There's also just not consistent requirements in terms of tracking when a store opens and closes in sort of traditional state-level databases. And so what we have done is we keep a database. We do keep a rural grocery store database in Kansas. And this originally started in 2007 when RGI was first established. And one of the people in our office had the idea to call, because we weren't sure how to get this data. So the original idea was call all of the post offices and see if the post office could tell us if there's a grocery store in that community. And then if they could give us the mailing address so we could connect with them. And so that's what first launched our rural grocery database. And it was about 250 grocery stores in Kansas at that time. It's now closer to 200, maybe a little less than 200. And since that first calling of post offices, we just try to keep track when we talk with a grocery store, mark if there's a change in ownership. But yeah, it is hard to keep track for sure the exact number of rural grocery stores. And this is just Kansas. I know that this is an issue across the country. And so I really would love to come up with a way to track the rural grocery stores opening and closings across the country, because this challenge I know exists throughout the country and in rural areas across the states. So, and this is a question people ask. How many stores are there? How many have closed? What are we making progress? And it's just difficult to track that number down specifically.
Yeah, I can imagine so. So I've had the opportunity over the years to sit in on several of the training sessions that you and your group have done, and they've been really great. And listening to a lot of the participants and the questions that they have for you, which are always very insightful, get you a little closer to what's really happening on the ground. And I believe that you've got a mix of independently owned grocery stores and kind of city cooperatives or small town cooperatives. What's the difference? Kind of obvious, but I might have you step through the difference in how those things function, and what's the predominance of one over the other, or the pluses or minuses of one over the other?
Yeah, so I would say one of the things that emerged pretty quickly for RGI when it was first established was that there are instances where a store closes and there's no sort of traditional method of reopening becoming available. There's not a mid-level manager that wants to take over. There's not a nearby local grocery store that wants to add another store. There's not a business owner that's moving back to the community that just wants to run a grocery store. And so these communities have had to think creatively. What else can we do? And I would say that Kansas has been really a leader in exploring these different models. We have seen all sorts of examples of partnership between individual communities or individual community members, official community leaders, governments, county, city governments, nonprofits. So a couple examples would be we've seen I'm trying to decide where to start. There's quite a few examples. So what most people might recognize is a cooperative. So a group of community members see a need, come together and decide we're going to open a grocery store because we want to fill this need. It is entirely run by that group of community members. Individuals that buy into the co-op are then part of the board and lead the efforts to run and manage that store. That's one model we've seen. We've also seen other sort of tangents off of that model. Side shoots would be a school-run store where the school district, the school board, has given permission basically to a school to operate a store as part of their educational mission. And students are involved. Students are learning about running a business. They're learning about marketing campaigns. They're learning about paying back loans that were taken out to open the store. And then there's also a few nonprofit grocery stores where there's maybe a community foundation that exists to serve the community and the grocery store is part of their mission, or maybe the foundation is created simply to operate the grocery store. And there's a couple examples of those in Kansas. On the other side of the spectrum is a real formal obligation or a formal commitment from a city or county government to operate a grocery store municipally, operate it as if it's a municipal utility, like a water utility. It's a line item in the budget. The grocery store is part of the city's operating expenses. In that situation, it is very much considered a public good, and almost always there is some level of community vote that happens. These would be taxpayer dollars going towards supporting a grocery store, and so often we see there's a vote or a survey or something like that, or a town meeting with a vote to ensure that the community as a whole supports that mission. And the municipally owned model has gotten a lot of interest recently. And I think part of the reason for that is that the model itself is not new. As I said, a utility, a water utility, is something that cities across the country offer. But using that model for a grocery store is a little bit different, and I think mainly because a grocery store is generally thought of as a for-profit business. And in this instance, the grocery store is really just trying to cover their cost. It's not nearly there's not as great of a push to maximize profits as much as you possibly can, because really they just want to be offering a service and keep the doors open. A unique piece of the municipally run model, though, is that the employees of the grocery store are city employees. And so that means there can be city benefits that those employees receive. And that is unique for a small town grocery store to be able to provide. And so I think there's potential for that model to provide a bit more sustainability in terms of retention of employees, which is a key aspect of operating your store. If you don't have the staff to do it, it's going to be a challenge to do it well. And so if you're able to add a little bit more of a benefit to working at the store, that can be a game changer. So the municipal model is one end of the spectrum. The co-op or nonprofit is another end of the spectrum. Right in the middle is what we call a public-private partnership. where a grocery store is owned by multiple entities or operated by multiple entities. Often we see this where a city or county government owns the building and all of the fixtures in the building, the coolers and the shelving, and then an independent business owner operates the business, owns the business aspect. And that's what we've seen most commonly, but we've also seen like local economic development organizations be the public entity, or even a public or a local bank has served as the public entity. And the perk to this model is that when a business transitions, the new person coming in has a much lower cost to get into the business. So instead of having to purchase the building, the shelving, the inventory, they just have to purchase inventory to stock the shelves because the city or county government, the public entity, is owning and operating the building. And it also can be beneficial because there are multiple entities involved, meaning there are multiple funding sources that could support the project. So a city government can apply to a very different set of funding sources than a business. And so if the city is keeping the grocery store open and accessing their own pool of funds, then the business can be keeping the business open, accessing their own pool of funds or grant funding. And it just diversifies the ways that the grocery store can be supported and stay open. So it also means that the city, hopefully, if they've bought into the building, bought into the business, that they are committed. And so when that grocer does transition, they are committed to finding someone else to take it on.
Oh, very good. Yeah, that answers a couple questions I had. So I'm going to steer us in a little bit of a different direction.
Okay.
Thinking about the survey, so I guess talk a little bit about the survey and the kinds of questions that I assume the survey goes to our grocery store owners across Kansas. So what are some of those questions that you're asking them?
Yeah, so the survey we just completed in 2021 was sort of a second round from a survey that was completed when RGI first was established. So in 2008, or 2007 is when we were established, and 2008 is when that first survey was completed. And so there were questions on kind of the basics of your store. How big is it? What type of food do you offer? What type of partnerships do you have? Like some will have a pharmacy in the store, or maybe they have a bank connected to the store, something like that. So we ask kind of just generally, what are you selling? We also ask about the number of employees. We ask about how long the store's been in the community, what types of major renovations or projects have they worked on, what are some of the biggest challenges that they face. In 2021, we asked about COVID. What were some of the impacts of COVID-19 on the store? We asked about digital or electronic sales, like e-commerce. That was new since 2008 for sure. We asked about their biggest competition. So, yeah, I think that covers it. But just trying to get a sense of what is their store, what are they operating, and what are some of the big challenges that they face. And we saw from 2008 to 2021 that distribution stayed a top concern, which doesn't surprise me. And competition remained a challenge. What we did see that was different between 2008 and 2021 was that competition looked a little bit different. So in the first survey, we didn't even mention dollar stores. In the second survey, we asked, competition with dollar store, competition with super centers, and dollar store was at the top for sure, although competition, both of those two categories were, I think, in the top 5. So competition with other stores was really key. And discount retailers, dollar stores really have changed the landscape of rural food access and have really come into the rural communities very quickly. So part of the reason why none of that showed up in the 2008 survey was that they really weren't on our radar. At that time, I think maybe like 2010, I know that Walmart had like their Walmart fresh or neighborhood markets or something like that they were trying to implement in rural communities. And a few Kansas communities had those, and they, for whatever reason, Walmart sort of backed out and it just didn't work. But that, I think, left space for something like these discount retailers, Dollar General, Family Dollar, to come in and fill that hole.
So from the survey, do you take a look at it and then identify what the priorities of the initiative are going to be going forward? And if so, what are some of the priorities that you're currently working on?
So, yes, in 2008, the information that was gleaned from the first survey led RGI to develop an entire toolkit around opening a rural grocery store, keeping a rural grocery store open, and that toolkit addressed some of the challenges that were identified in the survey. In 2021, the biggest new information was this need for support around transition planning. And so since then, we've really been focusing on transition planning support. We held 2 webinars series. So there was one in 2021, one in 2022. And we also created what we called our Rural Grocery Business Transition Mentorship Program, which was designed to connect mentors with grocers to really move specific, unique projects forward. We realized that the webinar series provided a lot of information, but didn't necessarily help direct the process of working on a mentorship working on a transition in a business. And so that mentorship program has allowed us to connect grocers to business advisors or to valuation analysts, or work with RGI staff to think about some of the ownership models that we talked about. And so that's, I think, really helped to support grocers in the process of moving towards transition. The Small Business Development Center says that you need 5 years to plan for your transition. So it takes time. And if whatever support we can provide along the way, along that path, we want to be there to keep those stores from closing. One thing that has come out of that knowledge of transition planning as being such a major need is the development of our Rural Grocery Transition Specialist program, which is a course, and it is meant to train other resource providers to support grocers. We recognized that the RGI team is only a couple of people, honestly. So, and we're trying to really move the needle on a big challenge. And so our team knows a lot of the resources that exist. And so we thought, what if we could train extension professionals, nonprofit leaders, rural community stakeholders, rural grocers even, on the ABCs of rural grocery transition planning, so that we could have these individuals deployed across the country. You know, maybe they're in Maine and there's a grocery store in Maine that needs some support. If we receive that inquiry, we could then point them to a rural grocery transition specialist. So we just spent the last year developing that curriculum, and our first offering is happening beginning January 15th of 2024. So
congratulations.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
We're excited.
Yeah. I'm going to take a question that steps back to your undergraduate work on a farm.
Yeah.
And just ask, do these grocery stores have connections with local farming groups? Do they vegetables and fresh produce that's grown in the area? Is there a connection there, or are they still working on shipping stuff in from wherever around the country with U.S. Foods or whoever it might be?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because that is something I'm very interested in. And we've done a couple different projects recently to try to learn more about that. By and large, I would say that is not the prime way that grocers stock their shelves. They often are working with distributors, wholesale distributors, to bring in the majority of their inventory. But we have seen that some grocers realize having local product is a way to differentiate themselves and a way to get people in the door. And so there are some grocers that really see that as a selling point. We also have seen there are some grocers that are in communities that are so small that they really can't purchase from a wholesaler. And so instead of trying to go the wholesale route, they focus on local sourcing. And that can be the most efficient way to stock their shelves. So it kind of depends on the scale of the store, but we know there are models out there that work really well for getting local food into local grocery stores, and our office is working on a project currently where we want to identify some of those models across the country and learn from those models. So off the top of my head, I know of a couple, but I'm sure there are many, many more. There's the Farm Stop model, which originated out of Michigan, and it's basically a consignment model for local produce where producers sell to a store, and the store is like a holding area for their product. And when customers buy product, it's like they're paying the producer directly. And it's really geared towards, here is a retail model geared towards supporting local food production. You don't always see that in a rural grocery store, and I want to know why. So I hope we can figure that out. I think there could be opportunity to bring that to a rural setting. I think many of the Farm Stop models that I've seen are in slightly larger communities, but you also have to have, I think, the local production ecosystem around you that can support that type of store. So it's sort of a chicken or the egg situation.
That was my follow-up question. Is part of the problem not having that, just the fact that the farms aren't there?
Right.
Most of the farms, certainly in western Kansas, are not vegetable farms. So having that available locally may be the challenge, at least one of the challenges that they're facing. Yeah.
Well, and for the grocers that do have a wholesaler, one challenge we've heard is that if they are grocery wholesalers often have a weekly ordering minimum. And so if a grocer is going to purchase locally, they could be taking away from what's helping them reach that minimum. And so it actually disincentivizes them from buying locally. So one thing I suggest to producers is if they walk into a store and they see other local produce, that may help you to see that, okay, you wouldn't be the first local product to be sold at this store, so maybe there's some room there. But also if you know that grocer is not working with a wholesaler, they're looking for ways to stock that store. And so those really small communities actually may be more flexible and more willing to work with local producers than some of the mid-size stores that are a bit more bound by the grocery wholesaler.
So another question is does your group also look at, and forgive the old term, I think there's a new term now, but food deserts across Kansas, and what do you do? So we've lost, 50 grocery stores, so I would guess that we have quite a few more of those areas that don't have access to wholesome foods.
Right.
And so what do you guys do in those situations? Is there federal and state funding to help provide the kind of nutrition, the kind of options that these communities need? Or
Yes. So in Kansas, there's a program called the Kansas Healthy Food Initiative, and this was established in 2017. It is a healthy food financing initiative. That's the term for a program like this. And there are healthy food financing initiatives across the country, often at state levels. There are some that are city levels and some that are regional, like multi-state. The Kansas Health Foundation in 2017 put money towards establishing or designated money to establish the Kansas Healthy Food Initiative. And RGI is one partner involved in implementing that program alongside Network Kansas, IFF, and the Food Trust. So Network Kansas and IFF are financial partners. They really are the ones that handle funding, handle loans and grants for healthy food retail projects. And the Food Trust is a national evaluation partner. So the Kansas Healthy Food Initiative provides funding for healthy food retail in low resource and underserved areas across the state that can be rural or urban or anywhere in between. So it's not specific to rural, although many of the areas that are low resource and underserved are in rural communities. So that program has supported grocery store projects, farmers market projects, mobile markets. It has also supported producers that are wanting to sell to retail outlets. And so the focus really is on access to healthy food at the retail level. So how can we either keep a store open, get a new store opened, get more healthy product to the store? Those are the types of projects that the Kansas Healthy Food Initiative can support through loans and grants. And then there is a national program as well. The Reinvestment Fund administers the National Healthy Food Financing Initiative, which is very similar to Kansas Healthy Food Initiative, just open on the national level. And a couple of years ago, I think in 2022, was the first time that any Kansas projects received funding through that program. So we were excited to see that.
And are you the middle person in those kinds of projects? Do you work?
With that program, when we hear that someone's looking for funding and maybe it's relevant, maybe it's related to, essentially when we talk to a project, if they bring up funding, we ask, what kind of fund, what are you trying to do? What is your timeline? What are you wanting to use these funds for? And if it's a KHFI project, we'll connect them. We'll talk to them about Kansas Healthy Food Initiative. Or if the national program's open, we would point them to that one. This last round of funding, we actually partnered with KU, the Center for Public Partnerships and Research, I think. They have some grant writing support for federal funding connected to food. Mm-hmm. And so we connected a few of the projects to a grant writer at KU, and I am certain that was part of why some of our projects were funded, is that there was additional support to get those grants submitted, because it's a federal grant. So
because those folks wouldn't know the first thing about writing something up. So that kind of help is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll tell you, believe it or not, we are coming upon an hour here.
Wow.
It went fast.
Yes.
Do you have any more comments or things that we didn't ask you that you'd really like to talk about or bring to the table?
Well, two things come to mind. One, to kind of round out, I know I spent a lot of time on the background, but I just wanted to say that I didn't grow up in a small town, but I grew up we had a locally owned grocery store that my family would go to. And the reasons people would go to that grocery store were customer service. It had the best baked goods, and the deli, they would have someone walk your groceries out to the car, and it was a place where so many of my friends in high school worked. And those are the types of things that we talk about, the benefit when we talk about benefits of rural grocery stores. Those are the types of things. And so even in my life, I know I've experienced the benefit of a locally owned independent grocery store. And those are the things that we are really fighting to keep alive in our small towns. So I think that I think the grocery store is kind of a universal symbol of just life. Everyone goes to the grocery store, and everyone has memories at their grocery store. And personally, I love going to the grocery store. I always have. And so I really am grateful to have a food systems background, but also experience in supporting or frequenting locally owned grocery stores in my own life that I can pull on in this role as we are trying to support grocers and keep grocery stores open.
I think I recall listening to some of the presentations that your group did, that a lot of times in these small towns, the grocery stores are the social center.
Mm-hmm.
They have a library, they have a deli, they have a pharmacy, and it's a place where people come to visit and talk and get to know one another.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Such an important piece.
Yes. Often there's a group of people who come to the grocery store to get a cup of coffee at the same day every day, and they're just, they're there. You can set the time by when they're there. And when the grocery store closes, they don't know. They don't have a place to go.
Right.
So, and then I'd say the other thing that's kind of programmatic and related to our work is that we will be hosting the National Rural Grocery Summit next year in June, and it will be in Birmingham, Alabama, actually. So we, last year it was hosted in Wichita, Kansas. It's been in Kansas since we started, and we are excited to be kind of expanding our boundaries and sharing the networking opportunities and learning opportunities that we know happen every year at the summit with a new region of the country, a new set of grocers and regional partners. Obviously, we've had people from 35 states attend in past years, so we'll still have, I think, pretty good representation, but it'll be sort of a new core audience that will be attending the summit. And yeah, I'm excited. We're excited to see how that all comes together. So
that's great.
Our call for proposals is open, so if anyone has rural grocery projects they want to talk about, we'd love to hear them.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great conversation, and we'll look forward to getting it posted.
Yes, thank you so much.
If you have questions or comments you would like to share, check out our website at lib.ksu.edu/innovation-lab and drop us an email. Our music was adapted from Wayne Goins' album, Chronicles of Carmela. Special thanks to him for providing that to us. Something to Chew On is produced by the Sunderland Foundation Innovation Lab at Kansas State University.